Well, hello guys. This is Katie with Vintage and Vinyl back with another great video for you. And I'm excited to be hosting this week's Tale from the Triptych. I will be telling my tale on all things New York New Year's Eve. I'll be talking about the history of the ball and the crowds and how you can watch the ball. And it's just going to be so exciting. This has been a big tradition for me since I was a young girl watching the New York Times Square ball drop on TV. So it's always been fun. And I thought this would be a great little history of the different balls. And it's so fun to be joined by Patrick, who's part of the triptych tonight. So welcome, Patrick.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this one, Katie.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Nate had a scheduling conflict, so he is not able to join us tonight. So it will just be the two of us. And I'm really excited to share this information with you. And thank you all for joining us. Hopefully, you guys can talk in the chat a little bit about the memories you have growing up watching the ball, because it's just such an iconic statement of bringing in the new year for so many people across the globe. So I'm going to say a quick hello, and then we'll get started with the show. This one's going to be a little bit shorter, but it's got some great information and photos to share.
And very
Carrie
timely.
is joining us. Yes, very timely. Carrie is joining us from the chat, so welcome, Carrie. I see Patrick saying hello to everybody. Cam's Folly is here, so welcome, Cam. Tim is here, so welcome, Tim. Teofane, thanks for joining. Sharon Delaney is here. Chad, Shop Retro Days, is tuning in, so welcome. Brian Hantz from the Chicagoland area. Laura and Mary Beth is joining from Fatbird Finds. We've got Charnel, which is new to me, so thank you so much for joining. I think I've seen you commenting on a few of my videos, so thank you so much. Donna DeMama is tuning back in, so welcome. Jan Goodwin is here. I'm glad to have you. Thrifter Not Hoarder. Peterson is tuning in the chat, and we've got TC, so welcome, TC. Thanks for joining. Kara, the Kitschy Corner, is tuning in. Amy B is here, so thanks, guys, so much for joining tonight. Now, once I start my presentation, I will not be able to see the chat, so Patrick will be able to take questions. So if there's any questions for you, you can put them down in the chat, and I will do my best to answer them.
And I will do my best to watch over those.
Thank you so much, Patrick. We're going to start with a little bit of the history of the ball drop. And the ball drop has a really fascinating history because actually ball drops have been used way before the balls were actually dropped in Times Square. They were used really as a way to show the passing of time. They were balls that were dropped, and the first ball was actually installed on the roof of the Flamstead House at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, England in 1833. This is the ball you're looking at now. And it was actually created for naval ships so that captains could set their chronometers and people could actually set their watches and keep time that way. So there are many versions of these across the globe, and they actually were used to keep time. And of course, that kind of sets the stage for what we know and love in Times Square today. Now, the first celebration of New York, New Year's Eve, really started in 1904 at Trinity Church, when people would stand outside in the mass crowds to hear the bells ring and ring in the new year. Now, of course, there was no ball at this point, but people loved the idea of gathering together in New York and celebrating the new year. So this is really the first celebration of the new year in New York City. Now, this is where the ball really gets its history. So in 1907, the first ball was dropped, and the person you're looking at here is Adolph Ochs. He was a publisher of the New York Times, and actually that's how Times Square got its name, because the Times building was in Times Square. And he really wanted to do a big celebration for New York, New Year's Eve. So he tried to secure a fireworks permit. But of course, the city had banned fireworks at that time, and they said no. Now, a few years earlier, he had done some fireworks to celebrate the opening of the Times Square building. And of course, the police didn't like that because, well, it's a fire hazard. So Ochs commissioned a wonderful immigrant, Jacob Starr, who was working for a sign manufacturing company, Strauss Signs, and they paired up with illumination expert Walter Palmer, who is kind of like the New York City illumination extraordinaire and electrician, and they created the ball, and it was a great way to celebrate New Year's Eve in New York City. Now, this is Jacob Starr, and I wanted to show you guys a little video here because I think this is really fascinating. He is the one that worked for Strauss Signs, and then later he became president of Strauss Signs, and of course the name got changed. So here's a little video on Jacob Strauss and the amazing work that he did for Strauss Signs, not only to help to create the ball in Times Square, but also to create many iconic signs that you know and love from the Times Square area. So here is Jacob Strauss.
Land of opportunity. Jacob Starr arrived in New York at Ellis Island on a Friday in October 1907. He was all alone in a new country and only 15 years old. Work was scarce as it was the Great Depression. Young Jake lived on a herring and a loaf a day, of which he purchased for 1 penny. He worked many odd jobs to survive and landed a job with Benjamin Strauss at the Strauss Sign Company. Later, Jake would partner with Ben and create Artcraft Strauss. Jacob's granddaughter, Tama Starr.
He was an inventor, an electrician, and a metal worker. And when he came here to the square, it was wide open for development of big displays.
Through his direction, Artcraft Strauss invented the huge electric signs that later became known as spectaculars. With the use of many components, including steam, mechanical motors, incandescent light bulbs, and neon tubes, Artcraft Strauss created most of the signs in Times Square. Some of the more famous spectaculars was the Camel cigarette sign, which blew giant smoke rings across Broadway and 7th Avenue, and the Bonds clothing sign, later owned by Pepsi, which pumped hundreds of gallons of water over a waterfall. For more than 100 years, Artcraft Strauss has contributed much to the crossroads of the world, also known as Times Square. Jacob Starr was a true visionary, and Times Square would not have evolved into what it is today without his insight, talent, drive, courage, and determination. That's why tonight, Jacob Starr is being honored as one of the...
So that is a quick little video. It's pretty amazing what they did and all the signs they created that really became iconic in the Times Square area. And of course, the ball, which is just absolutely amazing. So here is their factory, Artcraft Strauss. Now, Artcraft Strauss is still available and around today. You can have them produce signs for you, and that is their website. And I just thought that was a little fascinating video. I want to talk a little bit about the building that actually is home to the ball. Many of us know this building, and we don't really think about it much. This photo was taken, I believe, in 1906. And this building is now covered up by tons of advertising signs, so you wouldn't recognize it as the building that we're seeing here. But it's been changed and bought out by a bunch of different people. And what's really interesting about it is this building is practically empty today. It just is basically living for the fact that it has billboards on it, which makes a ton of money, and the ball is dropped from it. Now, this was home to the first New York Times building, and then, of course, they moved. And I wanted to show a little video here. Yes.
There is a question that came in. I know the answer to it, but you may want to comment on it. It's an iconic shape, and so Jan is asking if that's the Flatiron Building.
That is a great question. No, Jan, it's very similar to the Flatiron Building, but it is not the same building. This building is located in Times Square. The Flatiron Building is located in the Flatiron District of New York, but they have a very similar shape. In fact, you'll see several buildings like this throughout New York City that look very similar to one another. This building happens to be the first home of the New York Times, and is just an amazing building. And it's sad that it got covered up in so many billboards, but it makes sense when you watch this video. So actually, when you're watching the ball drop in Times Square and you're looking at this building, which has the big ball and then the 2022 sign, you can actually know that this building is now empty practically, but it once had a great history, and the ball has been dropped from this building for many years. So here's a little video of inside of the home of the New Year's Eve ball. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about, before we watch this video, the girl that you just saw in that previous video, Tamaya, the daughter or granddaughter, I should say, of Adolf Ochs, of the sign manufacturer, Jacob Starr. Really, really amazing. And she got to actually be a part of some of the ball drops and actually keep time. So I'll talk about that in just a minute. But here is a video that's pretty amazing of the inside of the home of the New Year's Eve ball. And of course, there's always an ad. One moment, folks, while we get past through these ads. This video I found really, really fascinating, and I just think it's a great use of the building now. I mean, it's sad that we've lost some of that beautiful architecture, but it is so amazing.
Part of Times Square, and so are the huge crowds. But despite the endless flow of people on the street level, there's one Times Square building that's almost empty. Floors upon floors are unoccupied, and it's been that way for decades. You probably know one Times Square because of what's on the roof, but the story of this odd building extends well beyond its corner on 42nd Street. Every year, around 1 million people pack the area to watch this crystal ball drop on New Year's Eve. Jeff Strauss is in charge of that production.
When I started in 1995, it was a ball coming down a flagpole and some confetti. And the whole tradition goes back to 1904, when this building, where I am today, was actually constructed by the New York Times as their official headquarters, right here in what was then called Longacre Square. The other newspapers thought that was crazy. You're coming up here to Longacre Square, it's the home of the horse and carriage industry. There's nothing happening up here. So they decided they had to have a big celebration, something, a real corporate promotion, show everybody that they were right here. And what they came up with was New Year's Eve.
The first few years they tried fireworks, but those were quickly banned by the city. So Walter Palmer, the Times head electrician, was asked to come up with a new idea.
And he created this lighted time ball that would drop at midnight. It attracted hundreds of thousands of people immediately to Times Square to celebrate the new year.
The Times lasted less than 10 years in the building, but it was quickly becoming an attraction, and people would jam into the area to watch important news zip around the news ticker at the bottom.
In New York's Times Square, crowds gather on election night as returns mount and Eisenhower landslide finds Ike winning state after state.
As the neighborhood picked up a more seedy reputation, the building got one too. In 1961, the New Yorker published a Talk of the Town story, which reported that there was a time when a speakeasy was going full blast in one of the basements, when the FBI, this was during the Second World War, was holding pistol practice in a basement and using a 7th floor office to trap German spies. In 1963, the Allied Chemical Corporation bought the building and then tore off the terracotta facade. At the time, Ada Louise Huxtable, an architecture critic, said it had a no-style skin of laboratory white marble with the look of cut cardboard. Allied wanted to make it into a tourist destination.
You haven't really seen New York until you visit the Allied Chemical Tower. Number 1 Times Square, Tuesday through Saturday, 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. You haven't really seen New York until you visit the Allied Chemical Tower, right in the center of things, at number 1 Times Square.
I think we get attached to places and they embed in our memories.
That's Lynn Segallen, professor of real estate at Columbia. She says that even after the outcry over the new facade, the building remained an important landmark in the area.
The iconic nature of it stays very much even, stable, rememberable, part of the history of the city. It almost doesn't matter who owns it, as long as it doesn't get torn down.
But the area continued to change. And by 1974, when Allied sold the building, the image of Times Square was the one from the movie Taxi Driver.
I was here in the 70s getting my first illegal ID. And I remember going to 42nd Street and being scared to death people were boarding up their windows. And it was one large, massive group, and the horses and fleets of horses, you get picked up. It was a scary thing to go to.
For decades, politicians tried to capitalize on that fear and made plans to reshape the area.
It has really been a horror for the city that when people came here and went to see that place they thought was the center of the world, it wasn't there. And what was there instead was really horrible and affirmatively scary to tourists and to New Yorkers, and kept giving us a bad name.
Every time there was a new mayoral election, there'd be the sweep of the prostitutes and the pimps and the johns, and they're all back on the street shortly thereafter. The city tried all kinds of strategies to clean it up, and they all proved unsuccessful until they decided to put in place a real estate strategy, which was to eradicate the bad uses and put in place the good uses.
That real estate strategy of buying out the owners of the so-called bad use businesses eventually took hold. But by 1995, the owners of One Times Square were in bankruptcy, and at that point, not many people wanted it. But the financial services firm Lehman Brothers did.
And Lehman saw the value as a billboard, and most of the real estate people missed the significance of that building.
Lehman flipped the primary purpose of the building from an office space to a billboard, and the strategy paid off. 2 years later, the nearly empty building earned them a 300% profit when Lehman sold One Times Square to Jamestown Properties, which has continued to lease to only a small number of occupants. Michael Phillips, Jamestown's chief operating officer, explains why.
The building is occupied on the lower 3 floors by Walgreens with some storage on the upper floors, and the One Times Square production management team for New Year's Eve occupy the top of the building. So it made most sense when you cover all the windows with signs to not have it be so occupied.
So how much are the signs worth?
I don't think I really want to quote numbers.
Filings from 2012 show that the signs generate over $23 million annually, and that accounts for 85% of the building's total revenue. The property itself has been valued at between $378 million and $495 million. In some ways, it's fitting that there's an expensive hollow shell sitting in the middle of Times Square. The area is often derided as a place of spectacle, not soul. And it's hard to feel nostalgic about a building that's been ugly for such a long time. But there's also something inspiring and mysterious about the building. And as the ball comes down on New Year's Eve, it'll be over walls and beams and floors that house nothing, except for stories about the history of New York City.
So that is a little clip and a fascinating video, I thought, of kind of the history of the area, the history of the building, and of course where the ball is. And to me, that use of the advertising signs, as sad as it is to see such a cool building get destroyed, it really does make a lot of sense. So now you have a new perspective on that building when you are watching the ball drop this year. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the different balls that they've had over the years, because there's quite a few of them. They've had a long history of balls. The first ball drop officially happened in 1907. The ball had over 700 pounds of material. It was 100 bulbs and was made of iron and wood. Now, this appeared until 1920. Now, unfortunately, I really couldn't find any pictures of some of these early balls. I just don't know that they're around. I looked and looked and looked and couldn't find any, but there's some really cool photos of the crowds gathering in Times Square. You can find those. Here's a photo from 1930 that I thought was very cool.
Now, you may be covering this, Katie, but does the ball stay out year round, or do they bring it inside in between?
That is a great question, Patrick. I'll touch on this in a little bit, but yes, they leave the ball out now all year round. It used to not be left out all year round. And now, of course, any time of the year that you want to go visit the ball, you most certainly can, because it is up in Times Square. Now, in 1920, there was a second version of the ball that was introduced. It weighed 400 pounds and was made completely out of wrought iron. It really didn't feature any flashy decorations. We think about flashy decorations now with today's balls. Now, of course, when you get into different eras, particularly the war era, there was actually 2 years that they didn't have the ball drop, and that was when the U.S. entered World War II. So in 1942 and 1943, because of wartime blackouts, they didn't have any ball drops, but people still gathered in Times Square to ring in the new year, and this will be the third year that officially they are not having New York city goers and all kinds of visitors come to see the ball drop. They will still have the ball drop. You can watch it on TV this year, but everything is going to be remote because of everything going on in the world. So this really is the third year that isn't going to be the same.
Now, Katie,
But
this may be a stupid question, but you said that they didn't do it in 42 and 43. Is that January 1st of 1942 or December 31st of 1942? Did
That
they
is-
have one a month after Pearl Harbor, or was it the full year after that they didn't have it?
I believe it was the full year, Patrick, but I'm not.
Okay, so they did have one like 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor?
I believe so, but I could
Because
be
that would
wrong.
have been considered the 41s. Okay, and there was a picture showing them there in 41s. I was wondering.
Yeah, I believe you're right on that, Patrick. Now, in 1955, the third ball was introduced, and it was made out of aluminum. Now, I was able to find a photo of a video, rather, of the third ball, which I thought was really cool. It's a very short clip, but you can see the top of the Times building, and here it is dropping down. It's a very old video, but and then see it goes to 1955. So what's interesting is actually how they would drop the ball before everything has become so electronic and amazing. They had pulley systems that were working the ball. So it was basically a couple of guys with a pulley system and someone keeping the time. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because Tamaya, the girl, remember, the granddaughter of Jacob Starr, she was actually up on the Times building helping drop the ball. And she remembers her years on the roof of the Times Square very fondly. And she says she took turns with her brother supervising and playing timekeeper. And when the last minute of the year arrived, the workers lowered the ball down using a very complex pulley system. She then goes on to say, using a series of tape markers on the pole, Tama was responsible for telling them to speed up or slow down. And with every ounce of their attention focused on the task, even the team's breathing would sync up during the 60 seconds. And she said, in performing this ritual, Tama seems this intrinsic link between the countdown, which she calls a minute outside of time, making every New Year's revolution. She said, when you are concentrating really hard, time just seems to slow down. It felt like the longest minute in the world, and it felt like you had time to wash your hair, call your mother, change your life. You really can change your life in just 1 minute. So that is how the ball would be dropped. Now, they would switch in the earlier times with the lettering that you see there that always has the year. They would switch the electrical switch on to light up the ball. And then right as it got down to the bottom, they would switch off the ball and switch on the other switch for the lettering that you see on the bottom, or the numbering rather, with the year. So I think that is really fascinating. Of course, now as we get more evolved, all the balls have changed and become really, really high tech. So this is a picture of the ball from 1978. I was able to find this photograph, and I thought it was just really fantastic. You can see the timekeepers and the people that are working the pulley, which I just think is so cool. And then the ball continues to change through the years. This actually was a campaign that they did in 1981, the I Love New York campaign. It was a campaign set to kind of promote tourism. And the that's hard to say, the New York ball introduced red lights. And of course, they had the green stem to make it look like an apple. So this was in 1981 that they did this ball, and it was only around for a short time. And I think that's a very cool photograph. I love looking up some of these photographs from the different times that these balls dropped. Now, in the 1990s, they introduced something kind of new. They actually had special guests that would start activating the ball. So the first guest was philanthropist Osceola McCarty, later followed by Muhammad Ali, and many other people would come to light the ball up and start the countdown for New Year's Eve, which I think is very cool. Now, there's different ways in which the ball was dropped, and here's a photo of this. This is an earlier photo, and it shows kind of that pulley system of how the ball was lowered down. Now, this photo is very neat. This is in 2000, and this is the ball that I remember being so fascinated by as a kid on TV. The ball was redesigned again for the Millennium Celebration at the Crossroads of the World, and it had all of these amazing crystals on it. Now, this is when Waterford Crystal started doing the ball, because it changed from the Philips light bulbs that were just screwed into sort of a basic frame to this style of ball. Now, this had 2,000 lights, and it measured 6 feet in diameter and weighed 1,070 pounds and 168 light bulbs. Pretty amazing. And I love the shape and the design of this ball. Now, the ball continues to get more high tech. And as you can see here, in 2007, it was updated again for the celebration's 100th anniversary. And this ball is particularly gorgeous. So Waterford Crystal has always done the balls that feature all of the lights. And of course, Philips lighting, again, is always part of the lights that actually make the ball illuminate. And I think that this is just a gorgeous, gorgeous ball. Now, this particular sign is always put up under the ball. So when you go to Times Square now, because the ball is up all year round, you can see the numbers for the year that are always under the ball. Well, in 2008, cars were actually banned from driving in the main part of Times Square. So they had pedicabs that would bring in the numbers, which I think is pretty cool. Now, this year, I did see a video of a truck that had the big sign brought in. So I don't know if they've lifted this ban or not, particularly for the ball. Now, I know when I was visiting New York, you could not drive in the main part of Times Square. So that's probably still in effect, but how they get the numbers in now, I'm not 100% sure. But this is a really, really cool photograph. And of course, now the ball is very high tech. And in 2009, it got its major renovation, and it made a permanent year-round attraction. So you can visit the ball anytime. And the big ball has so many different lights and techniques that are used to actually make it illuminate. There is 32,256 Philips Luxon LED lights at the time that this ball was up in 2009, measures 12 feet in diameter. I mean, that is just absolutely amazing. And now, if you go on to timessquareball.net, this is a fun website. I visited it many times over the years. It kind of gives you a little bit of the ball history, ball facts, and you can check out different ball cams during the night of New Year's Eve. So if you don't have cable, you can actually watch it through streaming through this website here. And they have a fact sheet. So they put this out every year explaining a little bit about the ball. And I just find this so fascinating. So this year's ball, 2022, is 12 feet in diameter. It weighs 11,875 pounds. It is covered in a total of 2,688 Waterford crystals that vary in size, ranging from 4 3/4 inches to 5 3/4 inches per side. And they actually change the colors on the ball every year. Because the ball has gotten so high tech, they can do different patterns and themes that represent the year. So this year, they're using a gift of wisdom. That's their design. They always name it. I think a couple of years ago, it was like pineapples they had, kind of representing welcome. So they do it differently every year, and you can go to this website and see what they have. And it kind of explains why they've chosen this design, which I think is really cool. So 2,688 Waterford crystals are then bolted to 672 LED modules, which are attached to an aluminum frame of the ball. The ball then is illuminated by 32,256 LEDs, which is a bunch of smaller modules. That's just a number that's amazing to me. And it's capable of displaying a palette of more than 16 million vibrant colors and patterns. So they really can change up the patterns from year to year, which is amazing. And you can go onto this website and read the ball history, the ball facts, and all kinds of cool things. So I really love what they've done with the ball over the years. The ball has gotten extremely amazing now that we have all this new technology, and it's just so cool. So I always like looking for the ball.
Now, as you've been doing your research, Katie, you may not know the answer to this, but you said that Waterford has done it since 2000. And that's the one that I also remember. Like there was a big deal about Waterford doing it for the millennium. But then Philips has had it, for the actual light bulbs. Is this something that they have to, I'm assuming it's just the highest. How do they get this honor? Are they paying to have the ball? How are they the ones being chosen each year? Could somebody step in and take over, or do they actually own that flagpole and the ball? Like, is this just a sponsorship, or do they actually own it?
Patrick, that's a good question, and I honestly don't know the answer to that. That is something I'd love to look up sometime. I do know that Philips, that has the light bulbs, they've been with the ball since some of the first balls featuring light bulbs. So Philips has been around for a long time using their light bulbs on the ball. And I don't know how they got doing that, if they were just the company that were selected at the time. And so they continued to do that. And same with Waterford. I don't know if they put in a bid and they were the ones that got the bid. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but it's a very interesting thought, Patrick. So I'm going to have to do some research on that. And maybe I'll post that over on Instagram for you guys. Now, watching the ball drop is something that has been really iconic for many people traveling to New York City. And this is a great photo from 1940, and they had about 500,000 people that year ringing in the new year. So it really has grown a lot since the early days of going to the first ball drop in 1907. Now, of course, over the years, it's just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And especially since TVs came and people were able to now watch the ball at home in 1960, in this photo here, you see people gathering around a large screen to actually watch the ball drop. So all across America, since TVs have become widespread, people have really been able to enjoy the ball from anywhere in the world, which I think is cool. Now, of course, what really made the ball drop extra special is Dick Clark, which we all know and love. Dick Clark's Rockin' New Year's Eve. It was featured in the show Friends with Monica and Ross doing their iconic dance. And in 1972, Dick Clark did start hosting Rockin' New Year's Eve. Dick Clark was originally on Bandstand. He hosted Bandstand from 1957 to 1989. And he has just been an iconic person for all of our New Year's celebrations for many years. Here's Dick Clark here on American Bandstand, and then here he is in Times Square hosting the ball drop. Now, unfortunately, he did have some health conditions and wasn't able to continue doing the ball drop. So Ryan Seacrest has been the one for many years now hosting it. I do believe that they still call it Dick Clark's Rockin' New Year's Eve. But it does always feature the Ryan Seacrest name since he passed away. And then when, of course, he was having health conditions, he had a stroke, I believe, and just wasn't able to talk as well. They did feature him a couple of times with Ryan Seacrest doing some interviews, and I think you can still find those online. Now, I want to talk a little bit about celebrating New Year's Eve, if you ever want to visit the ball in Times Square. This has been a dream of mine for a long time, to go to Times Square and actually stand in that crowd that you see on TV and watch the ball drop. However, it is not as easy as one may think, and it's not as magical as you see on TV, because you see a lot of people that are so excited to be there, and the crowd interviews are always so fun, and it just looks like you would have an amazing time. But there are some things that you should consider when you want to go visit the ball. As you can see, this is the Times Square official website. This is the center hub to learn everything about going to visit the ball for New Year's Eve. And what you should wear and bring was one of the questions I wanted to highlight here under their questions and answers page, because you're not allowed to bring any type of chair. You're not allowed backpacks or large bags. Obviously, there's a lot of safety concerns around large events like this, so they have to be extremely careful. In the 80s, I believe there were some bombings in Times Square, so they've really locked down security. So being able to just go and see it is not as easy as it used to be. In fact, when I was in Times Square, I was visiting the Swatch store, and the gentleman told me, long before they had all of the 9/11 concerns, he used to be able to go outside the store on New Year's Eve and just stand on the street and watch the ball. But they don't even let the people that do all of the stores and run all of the things in Times Square come out anymore to see the ball. It's that locked down. So if you go, you have to go really, really early in the morning. Now, this year, they are not opening the Times Square for viewing, but last year they did have it open, but they only opened it at 3 p.m. Now, typically, in years past, people line up at like 6 a.m. because you want to be obviously as close to the ball as possible. So you're standing outside. Usually it's very cold. You can't bring much other than water and maybe some food. And then here's the kicker of it. Will there be portable restrooms available? No, there will not be. There are no restrooms available. So you are not only outside in the freezing cold at 6 a.m. trying to get a good spot to see the ball, you're waiting from 6 a.m. or whenever you choose to arrive till midnight with no bathrooms. Once you leave the area, you are not allowed back in the gates. Once you're gone, that's it. So you're not allowed to leave. Stores are not open with bathrooms. There aren't much available in the way of food unless you bring it. And there's just a lot of restrictions. So if you're going to go visit the ball, probably I wouldn't recommend standing in that crowd unless that's something that you really want to do. But there are other ways to enjoy the ball from Times Square without having to worry about not having a bathroom and being cold. So there actually are companies that do New Year's Eve parties with a live view. And this really is the best way to view the ball if you ever want to visit Times Square and do this. And I think that this probably would be the best option for me. I still want to go. I still want to experience and do it. But I don't think I want to be without a bathroom. In fact, they interviewed a gentleman last year or the year before that was on, I believe, the Today Show. They do the crowd interviews, and he said that he wore some Depends. So that seems to be the going thing for people that are in the crowd, which sounds totally gross, but it's true. It's what people have to do to see the ball. So I recommend, if you're going to go, to enjoy one of these parties. Now, these parties can be kind of expensive. Tickets range anywhere from a couple $100 up to $1,000. But it's pretty amazing. So Madame Tussauds has a New York Eve party. The Marriott Marquis, which is located in Times Square, does have a marvelous view of the ball. There's many other hotels in that area that you can call around and see if they have rooms with a view where you could watch the ball. You could be inside the hotel room and you can have a wonderful view of the ball. Now, you do have to call a couple of months, well, I should say not a couple of months, a couple of years in advance. I talked to the hotel I visited when I was in New York, and I had a wonderful view of the ball from my hotel room. And it was the Millennium in Times Square, and they told me if I wanted to book a room, it would probably be about $1,000 a night, and I would need to book like 6 years in advance. So these things do get booked out far in advance, but the best way to do it is to either rent a hotel room or just be part of one of these viewing parties from one of the rooftop buildings in Times Square. Now, there are some Broadway shows that are open on New Year's Eve, so you can go see a Broadway show, but of course, they work very closely with the police to figure out the timing and to be as safe as possible in the area. So you got to be careful, though, with some of these parties and tickets. I have found that these tickets do have scalpers and other people that are trying to sell you tickets for an event that really doesn't happen. So when you're looking for tickets, you got to be careful that they don't say things like, oh, we can get you past the police or we can get you to the ball. There aren't any ways to do that. In fact, the police will stop you and tell you that you're not allowed in the area. So you do want to make sure that when you are buying tickets for something like this, that you do vet them. And the best way to do that is to go through a hotel concierge in New York, call them up, say, I want to do the ball many years in advance, plan your trip, and then talk with them about some of the best ways to buy tickets and to get involved with some of these parties. But it is a fun time, and it's, of course, a lot of great memories for us, even if we don't get to be in New York when it happens, to watch it on TV and to pop some champagne and sing Auld Lang Syne. So thank you guys so much for tuning in tonight to learn a little bit about the ball. This was fun sharing it with you. Here's a great photo from the 40s of people celebrating the New Year in Times Square, and that's what we'll end on this evening. Hope you guys have had lots of fun memories over the years watching the ball, and I can't wait to see what you guys notice this year as you're watching it on television. So thank you so much for tuning in, and Patrick, thanks so much for being here tonight.
Oh, this was great. Thanks so much. You covered so much more. And I think the universal comments in the chat was we're all going to watch the ball drop and the coverage of it much differently this year. I'm going to be trying to look between those signs, trying to find a window, see what that building looks like behind.
Well, it's so wild because when I was in New York and I went and visited that building and I saw the ball, I just assumed, I didn't know anything about the building and I didn't do any research. I just assumed, that's where the ball is. And doing research for this triptych was fascinating because I had no idea the history of that building, and it was just fantastic. So I definitely will be watching it differently too this year.
Fantastic.
Well, guys, that is going to do it for this evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. Patrick has some fun things coming up on his channel, and we have a joint sale this Wednesday. So make sure you tune in to Wednesday night at 9:30. In place of Duo Dive, we will be having an advertising and ephemera sale, and I've got some really cool things for that, and I know Patrick does too. So I'm looking forward to that. And Patrick, what else do you have coming up on your channel this week?
So I will, because of the pending holidays and everyone getting ready to watch the ball drop. So Thursday, I will not be having my sale or chat. So Thursday will actually be open, but I will participate in the Duo Dive on Wednesday. And then I believe I will be hosting the next triptych a week from tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern on the Trusty Huckster Mercantile channel. And I believe the topic for that will be, I've been kind of bouncing back and forth on what it's going to be, but I think the topic will actually be on Hot Wheels. So I'm going to cover all of our childhoods and talk about the red lines of the Hot Wheel releases.
Oh, that's going to be so interesting, Patrick. I'm looking forward to learning about that. Well, guys, as always, I hope that you will stay in, stay safe, binge YouTube, and have a very happy New Year. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.